I cannot describe Republican Party waywardness and misanthropy in a few minutes of a short presentation. But there are some terrible aspects of their conduct ever since the Vietnam era, which seems to have been ignored and forgotten. This is partly due to the weakness of the more liberal wing of American politics, the Democratic Party, who have let them get away with a lot. This letting them off approach by Democrats is dangerous because it is absolutely unlimited how much more damage the grand old party can do to America. In these slides, I will describe 4 key aspects of Republican wrongdoing, misbehaviour, and incompetence. I will also identify Democratic weakness and dithering. Finally, I will make some suggestions for attitudinal shifts in Democrats' approach. The Republican Party has become a radical insurgency, ideologically extreme, scornful of facts and compromise, and dismissive of the legitimacy of its political opposition. Is this a fair description of the Republican Party in the 2020s? It probably is, but it was actually said 2013 during the Obama era by no less than Thomas E. Mann and Norman Ornstein. The 3 key elements of their statement highlight the extremity, the disinterest in facts, and the dismissiveness of others and opposition in particular. Seems to apply fairly appropriately to the Republican Party of the 2020s. The 4 key aspects of Republican Party wrongdoing, which I will look at in these slides, is as follows. 1968, 1980 and 2021 items of treasonous conduct, which is indicative in my view of a pattern. The large number of crimes committed and scandals occurring from 1968 to 2025. The catastrophically bad errors in handling security for America before and after 9/11, and the at least 9-point plan to steal the 2020 presidential election. Many of those elements are actually still in place and can still be used. So number 1, the Republican Party is treasonous. Let's look at those 3 bad behaviours which I've mentioned. Firstly, then Republican presidential candidate Richard Nixon in 1968 personally tried to spoil peace talks of the Lyndon Johnson administration with South Vietnam before the 1968 presidential election. This was in order to try and give him advantage going into that election. It's unclear whether and how much his spoiling attempts were effective. Ultimately, the talks failed and the war continued for another 5 or 6 years. Number 2, the Republican Party plot to delay the release of the Iranian hostages till after the 1980 presidential election on the basis that Iran would get a better deal if and when President Reagan won office. This plot to delay was ultimately successful because the hostages were released minutes after President Reagan's inauguration when he became president in 1981, and evidence released in 2023 finally confirmed this. And lastly, the Trump and MAGA January 6, 2021 insurrection and coup attempt to prevent then President-elect Joe Biden from lawfully and constitutionally taking power as president. These all indicate that the Republican Party will stoop to any means and methods to either win government or prevent their opponents gaining government, meaning they will break any law, engage in treason, harm American citizens, damage democracy, breach and disrespect the American Constitution. Number 2, the Republican Party criminal darkness has been growing from the President Nixon era. This table shows the number of indictments and convictions of White House staff during the various Republican and Democratic administrations from 1968 onwards. And so the first row shows the Republican administrations, and it's quite clear there are 144 indictments of staff and approximately 90 convictions of staff during those Republican administrations. Whereas look at the Democrat administrations, a mere 2 indictments and 2 convictions. And of course, these scandals were much more frequent during Republican administrations, such as Watergate, Iran-Contra, Russian election interference, and the January 6th invasion. Here is a table comparing the scandals of legislators during various presidential administrations since 2001. These scandals include those of the legislators or their staff and associates, and the number of Republican scandals since then is 82, whereas that of Democrats is only 15. Hence, 5 times more for Republicans, thus showing the far greater unethical tendencies of Republican legislators and their staff. Number 3. The Republican administration ran strategically incompetent security policy pre and post 9/11. There are 4 angles which make up this allegation. Firstly, intelligence was available pre 9/11, but officials didn't join the dots. Miscellaneous agencies, the National Security Advisor, and even President Bush have been questioned publicly over their handling of intel available at the time, which pointed to the upcoming Al-Qaeda attack on 9/11. Secondly, special dispensation was given for the bin Laden family and Saudi royals to leave America shortly after 9/11 happened. This dispensation was given by White House officials. It's unclear how many were released and whether they were vetted properly. There were 6 flights between the 14th and 24th of September 2001, which evacuated key figures from the bin Laden family and the royal family. It is unclear how much this damaged 9/11 investigations, including potentially allowing those responsible to escape. And President Bush didn't capture bin Laden despite having a great opportunity to do so in Afghanistan soon after 9/11. In Tora Bora, Afghanistan in December 2001, the CIA requested a detachment of almost 1,000 Army Rangers to capture bin Laden and his close associates. But this request was refused by the Bush administration, the rationale being to move the focus onto Iraq, where Al-Qaeda was not and where there were no weapons of mass destruction. And this occurred only a mere few months after 9/11 occurred. There was evidence too of multiple contacts by 2 of the hijackers with 2 Saudi government officials in America soon before 9/11. This information was suppressed by the American government. This contrasts sharply with the false and empty allegations of Iraqi connections and having weapons of mass destruction that were pushed by senior Bush administration officials and the gullible media. Number 4. Republican efforts to steal elections and end democracy. There are at least 9 ways that the Republican Party has been trying to tip the scales of democracy in its favour or even put an end to democracy itself. First, by their routine gerrymandering of districts in state and federal elections. Second, by the increased use of voter suppression laws and tactics, especially since the 2020 election, with hundreds of state bills introduced into dozens of states along this line, and efforts are continuing under the second Trump administration. Third, the fake electors conspiracy in not less than 7 key states that Trump lost in the 2020 presidential election is a prime example of criminal and unconstitutional conduct. More than 50 people have been charged in state and federal cases as a result of these conspiracies. Fourth, there have been more than 900 instances of threatening and hostile messages and communications to election staff in 17 states, all inspired by and almost all alluding to President Trump's false claims of a stolen election in 2020. Fifth, President Trump and his allies falsely claimed to 300 legislators in key states in a conference call on the 2nd of January 2021 that there was widespread voting fraud and that the results should be decertified. Sixth, he also implored the Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger on the same date to create over 11,000 fake votes to turn the election result in that state in a now infamous phone call. Seventh, on January the 6th, 2021, over 100 lawmakers voted against counting the Electoral College votes on the basis of the false allegations of election misconduct. Eighth, President Trump repeatedly intimidated and cajoled then Vice President Mike Pence not to certify Joe Biden as the winner of the 2020 presidential election. And ninth and last, but certainly not least, also on January the 6th, there was an invasion of Congress, including threats to kill the Vice President and other high officials, with over 100 police assaulted and injured, and tragically 5 people dying also, with legislators, including those who wholeheartedly supported the insurrection, literally running for their lives. Overall then, these 9 points show a strategy that is highly organised, multipronged, relentless and very intimidating. The Republican Party then accused others of stealing the 2020 presidential election, including Democrats, when it engaged in exactly that conduct itself. Truly breathtaking. It is clear then that what Republicans prefer much more than a guy who obeys the law are guys who break the law and get away with it. The Republican Party has 3 core principles since the Trump and MAGA era. A dedication to lies, with over 30,000 lies and half-truths spoken by President Trump himself in his first administration. A dedication to breaking the law when convenient, and a dedication to tearing up the Constitution, which continues even more forcefully in the second President Trump administration, with rejection of birthright citizenship, rejection of congressional control of federal spending, and rejection of 2-term presidential limits. In summary then, the Republican Party is treasonous, is criminal, is scandalous, is strategically incompetent regarding national security, is anti-democratic, seditious and insurrectionist. And yet why hasn't the Democratic Party highlighted these aspects more? Shouldn't they fight harder to save democracy? Or would they prefer not to because they are scared of Trump and MAGA? Or they don't want to be impolite and offend? Compare the Democrats to the maniacal Republican investigations and obsessions against Democrats in the last few decades. There were 3 separate inquiries into the Clintons in the Whitewater controversy in 1990s, which led to 0 criminal charges against them. And after the tragic Benghazi attack in Libya, there were 10 investigations between 2012 and 2016, including 6 by Republican-controlled House committees. but no evidence was ever found of cover-up, scandal, or lying. And despite President Joe Biden being impeached during his presidency, there was no credible evidence found against him, with the chief witness eventually pleading guilty to lying to FBI investigators. If the Benghazi attack was worth 10 investigations, then surely the above-mentioned Republican Party ineptness on security policy regarding 9/11 was worth at least 50 investigations. But the Democrats barely made any political advantage out of these major controversies and errors. In other words, how weak are the Democrats? And what about their electoral weakness too? Donald Trump had 86 criminal charges from all his jury indictments, 37 felony convictions. He disrespected fallen American veterans at a French cemetery for World War I veterans. He made fun of a handicapped citizen. He tried to end democracy. He lied tens of thousands of times during his first term. He boasted about repeatedly sexually assaulting women. He almost had his first vice president killed, and his second vice president likened him to Hitler. And still the Democrats lost to him. A second time. As a further illustration of Democrat weakness, consider the following counterfactual. Imagine if a Democratic president did what Trump did in relation to trying to steal the 2020 election with the big lie, including the January 6th attack. In other words, imagine if the names of the parties had been reversed in the January 6th invasion and attempt to steal the election, and the Republican Party had actually won Congress and the White House in that election. What would have been the response from the law and order Republican Party after they came into power? On gaining Congress and the White House, the Republican Party would have immediately banged on the table endlessly with a clenched fist about the rule of law, elections and democracy, enacted something like a Patriots Domestic Insurrection and Treason Amendment Act to prosecute the former president as an internal terrorist, which would authorize immediate and indeterminate detention of suspects, raided the former president and put him in immediate and indeterminate detention. Democrats would have been shamed and guilty about what their president did. They would cower and support the amendment obsequiously with grovelling postures and hand-wringing. All the suspects and their aiders would then be locked up. Democrats would be banished to opposition for 2 to 3 presidential terms. Instead, in the real world, we had well-meaning but too slow attempts by Democrats to hold Trump responsible. Suggestions for Democrats. Enough with the Aunt Clara already. No more oh me, oh my. Time to toughen up. There are more aggressive ways to describe the Republican Party, such as these adjectives that have been referred to earlier in this presentation. And what about some more aggressive slogans such as these? And if Democrats are not willing to use words and phrases such as these to describe the Republican Party, then really what they're saying to American citizens is that they don't deserve any better federal governance than what they're currently getting. And muscularity is needed. These Democrat representatives embody the type of muscularity that the Democrats need to transform into. Why not aim to destroy the Republican Party? Literally. Aren't they dangerous enough that this should be the aim? Isn't that the prudent thing any democracy-loving American politician should aim for? Then a new conservative movement, anchored in reality, abiding by the law, and respecting democracy could be built in its place. everyone would be a winner, and not just in America. Of course, it should not be forgotten that good policy proposals by Democrats are the most important thing to address the needs of forgotten Americans, not the corporate-controlled policies that Democrats have usually implemented during the neoliberal era. And it should also be acknowledged that at times Democratic politicians have been strategically competent, such as the impeachments of Donald Trump during his first term and the January 6th House Select Committee. But something on the Liberal side of politics nevertheless has to change, because these days the Democrats couldn't sell a beer in a beach bar, nor could they sell a bowl of hot soup in the Antarctic.